Good afternoon. Welcome to ETAuto Budget Live Session. Budget for automotive sector. So what's in it? It was a budget which had a lot of hope for the industry, a budget with great expectation, and this was further upped by finance minister's statement that this is going to be one of its kind union budget speech that we will have, or a historic budget. Of course, certainly this budget is a historic one. This comes after a pandemic crisis, which was probably unprecedented. None of us almost who are alive now saw such a crisis. And this budget was coming after that. So, of course, it was one of the historic budget. It was also the first budget at the start of the new decade. So that way, also, it was very important and crucial. We have heard the budget speech and seen the announcements. We have seen one of the biggest, outcome of this budget is certainly the government has pressed the right buttons when we talk about infrastructure, we talk about healthcare, we talk about environment. But the biggest problem that the economy currently facing is of demand crunch. How much has the government really pressed there, what they have done in terms of creating demand, in terms of reducing the acquisition cost that the automotive industry was looking forward to? Start the discussion, before I'd like to bring in my colleagues who have been observing the budget very closely to give their sectoral understanding on the announcement. So I'll start with you, Shruti. How do you see the budget for commercial vehicle construction equipment and auto component sector?
As you rightly mentioned, sir, that after the pandemic affected economy, just like any other industry, auto industry was also focusing on pushing the consumption. So I'll first start with the proposal of voluntary vehicle scrapping policy, which is certainly a good step to test the waters. Why I'm saying so? Because of all the affected segment in the COVID-19 pandemic, medium and heavy commercial vehicle appears to have taken the hardest hit because in the last 9 months, we have seen close to 38% decline in the wholesales number. So this like announcement is certainly while the industry is seeing as a positive sign, and this certainly will propel demand for the CVs and PVs as well. But we have to see the like what lies beneath the policies and the proposal, because it is still a soft step towards demand generation. And we have to wait and watch for the details to get an idea about the actual impact of this policy on the industry. Moving towards the another important fine print is the MSME is on the MSME side, where the government has set aside close to 15,700 crore for the allocations for the MSME industry, which is just the double which was proposed last year. And if we look on the component side, MSMEs constitute close to above 80%, 85% of the component industry. So there, it will be a really interesting thing to see that how this will expand the kitties of MSMEs, and how this allocation will help in increasing their business activities.
Will certainly help the MSME component sector. I'll come to you, Dipanshu Tomar, for electric vehicle. Do you have some great news to share?
So, as we have all listened to the budget, there's no such direct announcement on EV sector, as everybody was expecting that there should be a significant investment and policies in terms of charging infrastructure, but it find no mention. Apart from this, there is an inverted duty structure of batteries. A lithium battery fitted in EV attracts 12% GST. The same as on EV, it would attract 18% GST when sold separately. So there is no mention in also of FAME. So there is a big miss for EV sector this time.
Overall, Dipanshu Tomar is not a happy man today, as he covers electric vehicle very closely. I come to Chanchal. Chanchal, hope he has joined in.
He will join in a while.
Okay, so I'll come to you, Mr. Sangi. First of all, you are now wearing the hat of president of ASDC, Automotive Skill Development Council. I heard the finance minister making some announcement. How satisfied are you with that? Do you think those announcements will be enough to, fill the gap in terms of the change in the industry, the transformation in the industry that is coming up, that is going to create a void in terms of skilled manpower? Do you think it is a step in right direction, or you are contented?
It's never sufficient. So, ye dil mange more is always what, as an industry person, I would like to say. But I would say it's a step in the right direction. The realignment of NAPS with a special focus on engineering and diploma students, a dedicated fund of 3,000 crores to encourage diploma engineers and degree engineers to get into apprenticeship. And I think a very, very positive step, because these short term courses don't really skill people to industry standards. And this should give sufficient impetus to the industry to employ engineers and diploma engineers as apprentices, and skill them over a longer period of time to fit the industry standards. So definitely a step in the right direction.
Mr. Malhotra, you are a keen observer of the industry. You have been leading one of the car companies. We have heard about the scrappage policy. Finally, it is here after decades of wait. How do you see this scrappage policy in the current form, when we talk about 20 years for personal vehicles, 15 years for commercial vehicle, and that too not mandatory but voluntary one?
So obviously the announcement, the focus on scrappage, clear announcement is a welcome step, although it's voluntary. But I think what is required is either you needed to push scrappage, you either need strong incentive or disincentive, which I'm not seeing. Although the green tax was announced a few days back. The way I look at it, it's a new dawn, but it's a misty dawn. Oh. And I think something more needs to be done. Although it's a good start, probably government also wants to test the waters. And based on the feedback from the customers, industry associations, and industry bodies, probably they will take the next step forward. But all in all, a positive step. That's what I would say. But it could have been much better.
Okay. I also see it very positive, provided it is voluntary. But there should be a mandatory roadworthiness test after the time period or the age of the vehicle. That's very important. Otherwise, there will not be any efficacy. That's what
that's right. That's right.
I'll come to you, Mr. Singh. Day before yesterday, when we were talking, you pointed out that infrastructure becomes very important. And we see that quite a good, reasonable allotment or allocation for the infrastructure. Do you see the C industry or the tipper trailer industry doing better going forward?
Yeah, we are last few months, as I mentioned other day, we have seen good traction, and going forward, it is a very positive budget for construction equipment industry. Government is taking all right steps. Like today, what we heard is announcement of DFI, Development Finance Institution, monetization of assets to fund these projects, which was the main hurdle, for our contractors and big corporates while taking any projects. And also increasing allocation of funds for metros, urban development, Swachh Bharat. These are all positive signs which government has been talking about. And I think when they put all these funds in action and execution, I'm sure it will help in development of overall economy, infrastructure, and generating more employment.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Saurabh, I'll bring you here. Saurabh is a tax partner at EY, Ernst & Young, and he closely looks at automobile industry. Saurabh, the finance minister has alluded to some kind of revision in custom duty on auto component. How do you see this in times like this, when supply chain is already turning out to be one of the hurdles? In a time like this, we have seen the way we are dealing with the crisis of shortage of semiconductors. And last year also, we saw some increase on the auto components. Do you think we are capable enough to support all the supply? Do you think it is a move in right direction if you talk about the short-term goals right now?
So, Nabil, if you see in the last budget also, there has been a rate increase on auto components from 10 to 15%. Primarily, if we look at this was the expectation from the budget that in whichever sectors the production linked incentive scheme is being announced by the government, in those sectors there will be a likely increase in the tariff rates, which is happening today. If you see the type of products in the auto which have seen a rate increase are more like frames and forks, wheel rims, hubs, brakes, saddle, pedal, and crank gears, etc. See, while in a short run, there can be a problem, but of course, there is a push required from the government end to promote domestic manufacturing. I think this is that particular push in the form of a policy level change to boost domestic manufacturing, though the effect of the same will be faced by the OEM in the form of decrease in profitability.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to you, Mr. Malhotra, we were talking about demand creation. We have seen a huge shortage of demand apart from a passenger vehicle. We see if you look at the base that we had, we are still far behind. Don't you think after the sluggishness of almost 2.5 years, 3 years, there was a need to boost the demand? And what could have been done that you think that is missing in this budget?
So, GST is anyway out of the budget at the moment. It's decided by GST Council, and this is a long drawn traffic which is going on. So that we were never expecting. But I think two positive things are there. One is this spend on infrastructure and public transport. This should help the industry, especially the commercial vehicle industry. And second, there's Atmanirbhar, which we are talking of, and which Saurabh did mention about this focus on, especially on this budget being earmarked for the product production incentive, which is quite substantial, 1.97 lakh crores, and I believe a fair amount of proportion of that should come to the domestic. It should help us. But I feel overall the sentiments are more positive because if you have infrastructure and if you focus on agriculture. So nothing very directly to do with automobile except the scrappage policy, but this focus on infrastructure, the focus on PLI, and there was a special mention by the finance minister on the plug and play approach, whereby making them centers where you can become centers of excellence like what you have in Taiwan or what you have in Korea or to some extent in Japan. So overall, we could have expected much more. We didn't expect a reduction exercise. I think it's still positive. Only what Dipanshu mentioned, electric vehicle is just nowhere in the radar, which one would have expected to focus because the FAME 2 policy has not made any progress in the last 1.5 years.
Mr. Sanghi, what are your hits and misses in this budget? If you are to list some hits and misses from the budget speech today.
Nikunj, you'll have to probably unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I think what Mr. Malhotra talked about, a huge spend on infrastructure and specifically the road infrastructure. I think that's a very, very big positive, and it should give a huge fillip to MNHCV industry and earth moving equipment and construction industry, because these are the areas where demand was still lacking, specifically in MNHCV. The other is a spend on buses as road transport. I think that will, so I think even within the MNHCV, buses were the one which were suffering the most. The 18,000 crores announced under the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Improvement Scheme, that will be a huge fillip for the bus industry. So those are two very, very big positives. The third, of course, the scrappage policy. Why I'm happy about the scrappage policy is that we have been talking about the scrappage policy for the last 3 years. It has now been officially announced. If tweaking is required, we will see the way forward. But it is now officially recognized that yes, the scrappage policy was required. And this will start moving some vehicles out of the system which were the polluting vehicles. So 20 years for personal vehicles and 15 years for commercial vehicles. But it has to be mandated by these automated centers. Now, to create infrastructure for these automated centers where these vehicles will be tested and declared good for scrappage is one gap which I have not heard anything about, how this infrastructure will be created for automated test centers for this mandatory certification about scrappage. Two, of course, I think it will have to be a carrot and stick approach. There'll have to be some very strong incentives for people to give up their existing vehicles and disincentives if they want to continue using those vehicles. So I think we did get a hint in terms of green taxes, which the Honorable Minister for Transport did announce a couple of weeks back. So a combination of all this should kickstart the scrappage policy. But yes, we were expecting much more from the scrappage policy than what has been announced. But overall, I think a 5.4 lakh spending on infrastructure is going to be a huge fillip on demand. You were talking about demand triggers. I think this will be a huge demand trigger, which will definitely generate employment, definitely generate investment, and definitely generate some kind of demand in specifically the commercial vehicles segment, which was not as good as the passenger vehicle segment that we saw.
Mr. Singh, I'll come on the same question to you as well. What are your hits and misses from today's budget?
Yeah, hits, I think the availability of funds, like I mentioned, development financial institution, where they are talking about capital of 20,000 crore and 5 lakh crore funding available in next 3 years will certainly help the industry. Now, only I can say that, we have been seeing that government has been very proactive in making these announcements, but bringing it into practice, allocation of funds, clearing projects and monitoring those projects to make sure that, they are happening on the ground is very, very important. Monetization of asset, because that is also a very important step. And government has seen some good success in the past, will certainly help in the development of infrastructure.
Just want to understand what, in terms of a scrappage policy, of course, we do not have the details available yet, but just want to understand what happens to the ruling specific to Delhi NCR when diesel cars beyond 10 years were banned. So how will this pan out now? Do you see an impact? Anybody?
Yeah. Arun, I think Arun is the right person.
So, frankly, Delhi was very progressive in the 10-year for diesel and 15 for petrol, and this was even for personal vehicles. Now we got all the personal vehicles in a category of 20 years and commercial vehicles in the category of 15 years. So I don't know, it's anybody's guess whether Delhi will still continue its momentum, which was a positive thing, or Delhi will have 2 steps back and follow the national policy. But I believe Delhi will carry it on. I think the direction would be from other states also to move to a shorter span. Because frankly, if you're talking of 20 years personal vehicles, this is not much of a scrappage policy. 15 years is a limit. You don't see many vehicles of 20 years. So that's the way I look at it.
So rightly put. Saurabh, how do you see this, entire announcement that has come up? Do you think it will encourage further investment in automotive industry, provided when the demand continue to be low, our capacity still remains idle? In such a situation, how do you see this? And also the job creation. And do you think this will at least stop the job cuts that has been happening? We have seen in the last 2 years, and especially that has been accelerated in a post-COVID world.
See, at least I have been bullish on the investments in the auto sector. With the increased duty rates on certain specified components, for sure, there will be an incentive for the industry to set up manufacturing of those specific components in India, because the duty arbitrage is 10 and 15. So 15% duty being there, 5%, there is a clear increase in that particular duty, forcing the industry to buy locally, which means increased investment and honestly increased employment as well. Of course, PLI, we have been talking about PLI since November or so. Overall, PLI, in my view, will see a boost in the investment in the sector.
Thank you, Saurabh. So I have just Vinny Mehta, Director General, Auto Component Manufacturer Association, has also joined in. I'll go to Vinny now and understand from him what is their need for auto component sector. Vinny, if you could come in. Probably we are not able to connect. Vinny,
yeah, Vinny? I'm there. I do not know why my camera is not switching on.
Okay.
So nevertheless, so thank you, Nabil. And I think the budget is by and large pretty satisfactory from an auto component industry point of view. Of course, I'm sure all the vehicle manufacturers must have spoken, and the scrappage policy hopefully sort of will deliver. And that in turn would help the component sector. But that apart, there are certain items that just Saurabh spoke about, where there is a duty enhancement. This is related to certain glass items. It is related to drive transmission. It is related to certain wire harnessing, also steering systems and braking items. And we hope that, in the context of Atmanirbharta, this will, in some sense, give boost to the local manufacturing. Yeah, that's about it. So,
How do you see some of the anti-dumping duty on import from China on alloy and etc. has been revoked? How do you see this?
So Nabil, we have to see how it pans out. But prima facie, the government functionaries have been talking about, and they are well aware of the challenge that the industry is facing on the raw material front, especially on the steel. And so there is removal of duty on steel scrap. I hope this all will help in the availability of steel to local manufacturing industry. I would say that's a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Vinny. Please,
Thank you.
I'll have another question. I'll come back to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm logging off now, Nabil. Text me and I'll come on board. Okay. Thank you.
My team will connect with you.
Yeah,
Thank
bye.
you, Vinny. So I have Goldie Bahal. Mr. Goldie Bahal is the CEO of a Smarty, electric mobility service provider. Goldie, thank you so much for joining in. How do you see the budget? What's your take on it?
Thank you, Nabil, for having me here. Hello to all the panelists. Budget from an electric mobility startup, we didn't see much announcements being made. I think there were, I would say, a lot of hope, as always is, for the Honorable Finance Minister to extend GST cuts, on battery swapping, on batteries. That obviously was not, not see that coming out. Having said that, I think there's still a couple of welcome moves, both for the electric vehicle startups as well as startups in general. I think, one of the announcements that the Honorable Finance Minister made was around the tax audit exemption for startups with turnovers to 10 crores. I think that's a welcome move that will allow a lot of young and fledgling startups, to reduce their, I think, compliance. The other piece which was fairly interesting was the government allocating a lot of budgets towards construction of metro, right, in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And as we have seen that as metro lines get created, the growth for mobility in general, intermediate public transport sort of mobility, does get a lot of impetus, as we've seen in Delhi and Mumbai. So while it's not a direct intervention, I think those moves do tend to put in place a long-term roadmap for companies like ours to grow. I think vehicle scrappage policy, I think everyone has spoken about already. I think we are hopeful that this policy gets implemented and we start seeing older vehicles, especially the diesel vehicles, which are above 10, 12, 15 years ago, getting scrapped and then getting converted to electric vehicles. So hopefully those are the 2-3 sort of silver lining in the bullet from an electric mobility space.
Thank you, Goldie. I would like to tell the viewers the biggest panel of automotive experts continues. If you have any questions, query, do post in our comment box, also on LinkedIn and also on ETAuto.com. I'll come to you again, Mr. Singh. Just want to understand, we have seen the infrastructure allocation is there. It's been there for quite some time. We have seen infrastructure has been the focus. Do you think the implementation or the execution will be a constraint, or do you think it will go on time? And where do you think all the allocations that has been announced, do you think the funds can be made available easily? The government has that much of room to fund all this?
Yeah, so I must compliment, during pandemic, NHAI put their act together when they had time. Earlier projects were announced without having very clear image of availability of land, environmental clearances. Now it has become mandatory that before they announce or before they allocate the project to the contractor, 80% of land and funds availability has to be there. So therefore, today, when they allocate the job, the time between allocation of job and starting the construction work has been minimized. So therefore, I think that is a very important step which government had taken. The second hurdle was availability of funds, which government is now going to handle now with the development of development financial institution and making funds available. Now, how do they manage this? Because it has to be managed professionally. And that is where government has to play a very, very important role. So if they are able to do this, I'm sure the projects will move much faster. We have seen the road construction pace increasing from 10 kilometer a day to 30 kilometer a day. Now we are talking about soon it will reach to 40 or maybe another year's time to 40, 45 kilometers a day. So these are all positive signs. So I'm sure government has taken all these steps in the right direction. So execution and professionally managing these aspects is very, very important. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Mr. Fangi, I'd request you to put a hat of a dealer. You are also an automobile dealer, former president of FADA. Just want to understand what in it for you guys. Any specific thing do you find in the budget?
So, I am very interestingly looking at the allocation for MSME, and as you would have realized that dealers can now be registered as MSME, and quite a few of them who have investments of less than 50 crores and turnovers of less than 250 crores are already registered as MSMEs. So we will need to see the details in terms of what is it in for MSMEs, and can dealers, having now been registered as MSME, can they benefit out of that allocation that has come from MSME. The other thing, of course, definitely is the demand booster, specifically, like I said again, in commercial vehicle segment, because dealers of heavy commercial vehicles, medium and heavy commercial vehicles have been really languishing. And it looks like a very potent budget in terms of pushing up the demand for MNHCV vehicles, and that's a positive again for dealerships which are engaged with commercial vehicles. In terms of Atmanirbhar, I think there is a concern because we are facing a component shortage in the automotive industry. And while anti-dumping duties on components will be a very big positive in the long term, short term, I guess it will have an impact on the cost of vehicles. As you know, prices have been going up because commodity prices have been increasing at a very, very major pace. This will be another cost component which will be added on, because till such time capacities are created within the country, we will need to depend on imports, and all these components will now come in for a higher duty. So
thank you, Mr. Sanghi. Thank you, Vinkesh, for joining in. Vinkesh Gulati, President FADA, Federation of Automobile Dealers, for request recommendation to the government, especially one of them being, getting an industry status. And I don't see any major announcement coming in that could benefit. How do you see the allocation for digitalization that the minister has announced today? Do you think that will help you in terms of e-retailing or digital dealership or those kind of initiative that the FADA or the automobile retail industry was looking forward to?
Thanks, Nabil, for having me. Good evening, Sandeep ji, Arun ji, Nikun ji, everybody known to me and stalwarts in auto. So, Nabil, frankly, I don't think so. The digital will, the point you mentioned will help us a lot. But overall, what we expected was that this budget would have been a great demand revival boosting happening. So it's a mixed bag. You've seen some good things and some not so good things. So obviously, you'd already discussed there are scrappage policies, one good thing, but I doubt How much will it actually convert into retails? We'll have to still see. And even our Nitinji in the post budget has also given some fine print, but not the exact incentive amount. And we have to wait another 15 days for MORTH to come down to the details.
We're looking very, very not very excited on today's budget. I just want to understand what are the pain points that probably you wanted to be resolved in this budget that you still miss.
So Naveen, practically, see, there are a lot of things. Government is pushing us for Atmanirbhar Bharat, and so if we see, the best thing for auto retailers would be improvement in customer segment sentiment and demand revival. That are the two main things what we were expecting there. And obviously, for improving both of that, FADA had represented the ministry to at least repeat the depreciation, additional depreciation which they gave last year also because of the downturn. Or the second thing what we had requested, that even individual be covered into the depreciation for vehicles. So I feel if any of those could have been implemented, it would at least give us the initial boost for demand revival. And we were also expecting that, seeing the last year budget where they had done some rejig in the income tax process, like without deductions, you could have some special. We were thinking that something will improve in that, so that at least some disposable income is increased in the hands of customer, which in turn will increase their purchasing power and affect our retails.
Okay. Somehow we arrive at that. There's some positives. Great. I'll come
But
to
no
you.
doubt, if you talk of the infrastructure front, like Sandeep ji mentioned, we are happy with the kind of outlay committed for the road infrastructure. So like 65, 75 kilometers for highway in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, West Bengal, Assam, and another some 19,500 kilometer for this Bharatmala. It will give the needed push for the commercial segment what we were pushing.
I want to understand, is there something direct to further give impetus to the rural economy or rural demand? Do you sense something that is directly connected or direct boost to the rural economy in this budget?
I am sorry, I haven't yet gone through the fine print, but it's nothing looks in the as of now. So maybe once we are through the fine print, we can comment on that.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, we have heard that there's a location for National Research Foundation. Do you think NRF allocation will trickle down to the automotive industry and encourage more, R&D in this sector, especially when the weighted deduction on R&D was taken away? So do you see some kind of arrangement, some kind of booster coming in for R&D?
Yeah, I think it will, because we just have to look at
our automotive sector, do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure it will. And we have to look at the fine print of the budget. What are they talking about? But I'm sure it will really help the automobile industry. And innovation and R&D will certainly, get pushed with this.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Malhotra, if I have to ask you specific to the passenger vehicle segment, you already mentioned that 20 years is as good as having no scrappage policy. So that means you are saying almost, but we have seen the automotive stocks have rallied a lot after this announcement. So do you think this settling down after people understand the probably euphoria, or they come out of the euphoria? Or do you think it has still some strong metal in it?
Yeah, you rightly said some of the stocks, not all the stocks have gone up. Some of the domestic auto companies, especially the four-wheeler space, their stock prices have shot up by 6%. I think it's a function that they see a lot of spends on infrastructure and rural. And as a political motive also, government will focus a lot on rural and farmers. So that's probably the positive part which is being seen. As far as the scrapping is concerned, I think if he has combined well with the green tax, and if it's a judicious approach, and as Nikunji also mentioned, probably it's a start, certain steps will be taken after some time. This will help. but I don't see the scrappage policy helping in the short run in any way. Whereas the infrastructure spends would probably, or the public transportation spends would help in the near future. But scrappage will take some time to have a trickle-down impact in terms of demand. But a lot of people also expected some big taxes to be put up for the middle class or something. That hasn't come. So that's also a positive. So not having that also is a positive part. That's the way I look at it.
Mr. Sanghi, you track the economy also quite well. I just want to understand, it's been quite a long time since the salaried class, who are the biggest spender in the market, they have been given relief in terms of tax slab increase. Do you think it was time was ripped that we should have at least made 5 lakh rupees mark as non-taxable for everybody this year?
So definitely it would have been a very welcome step because it would have increased disposable income in the hands of the middle class, and which would trigger a demand and therefore the revival of the economy. But I think the government is constrained. The government is really constrained of funds. They are already talking about this year being a 9.5% fiscal deficit and next year being 6.5% fiscal deficit, which are huge. And so I think the government had to choose between giving away in terms of capex, and 5.54 lakhs in capex is huge, and giving some relief to the taxpayers. So definitely a disappointment for the salaried class and the middle income groups. But I guess the government has tried to do the best possible within the constraints that it was operating.
Thank you. Goldie, I would like you to come and comment. Goldie Srivastava, I just want to understand, how does it pan out for electric mobility? Do you see the demand for three-wheelers where you operate, or the last mile connectivity in terms of electric vehicle will get a hit, or you think it will continue as it is? It will be a status quo kind of situation there?
Yeah, I mean, subsequent to the budget today, we do not see any specific impact, positive or negative. I believe for good part, it will continue a status quo. I think on the scrappage, however, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, especially in cities which has significant, and there are a lot of cities that have significant population of diesel vehicles that are more than 10 or 15 years old even, especially the three-wheelers, right? With very clear scrappage policy being put in place. Hopefully that should give an impetus and also allow the governments to take, for example, I can tell you about Haryana, wherein the government has taken a very bold decision to effectively ban diesel vehicles that are more than 10 years old, right? Diesel three-wheelers. So it will allow perhaps the government, state governments to take some very, very definitive actions, which then should translate into adoption of electric three-wheelers for that for that replacement. So I think that's the only upside that from our perspective we see as far as the three-wheeler segment is concerned.
So I'll try to take some questions in between from the audience also. Before I go to my next expert, I'll take a question from Ashish Hathi. His question is like, boost given to building construction industry to generate boost demand in terms of certain tweaks to duty structure. There's no boost given to boost demand of automobiles. All that is now left on to manufacturers. What is your views? So I'll go to Mr. Singh also, and then probably others can comment.
Yeah, you may have to please repeat your question. I was a little tied up with my mobile.
Coming up from one of the viewers, he wants to understand the construction industry has been given some boost or temporary tweak in the duty structure, but for automotive industry it remains same. There is no boost from the government. All is left on the manufacturers. So how do you look at that? Because people also have been blaming that this in the last few years automotive industry has been largely neglected. So how do you see that?
Yeah, so my take would be on construction equipment. We were not looking at so much on duty structure, but we were looking at depreciation on construction equipment, because the way it is being treated in commercial vehicles where it was enhanced, now they have not continued with that. We were expecting that they will continue with commercial vehicle as well as they will bring in construction equipment in that sphere, because we have been making strong recommendation to increase depreciation on construction equipment, because they are the one who are propelling the infrastructure development. So that is where I think little bit of disappointment. The other concern, I don't know how will they manage the increase in input cost, which is happening with iron ore, steel, and commodity prices. How will they restrict the import of some of these input material? And therefore, there's not much announcement on this part. So we believe government might do something on this, because this is what is affecting across the industry, not only construction equipment, but other sectors as well. So these are my comments on this. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Singh, for joining in. Let's go to our next panel member who has just joined in. Pramod Achyutan has joined in from Ernst & Young. Pramod, I just want to have a quick, thought from you on what do you see in this budget, especially for the automotive industry.
Yeah, thanks, Nabil. Good afternoon to everybody. So yeah, it's a budget where we had a lot of expectations in terms of, for the auto industry, some specific things to be introduced. And, there was a lot of talk about a COVID surcharge coming, about some new taxes, long-term taxes on equity market. All of that has not come through. The finance minister has, 6.8% fiscal deficit for next year, with a 35% increase in capital expenditure. So overall, it's not a case where the finance minister is saying, I want to, show a good fiscal deficit to overseas rating agencies. She has said capital expenditure is the need of the hour. So I would think that's a big positive for the industry. The vehicle scrappage policy, voluntary, and the words voluntary are interesting there. We need to wait and watch what exactly comes in that policy. It's something that, the number of years could have been lower, but something, it's a good start, I would say. So again, that's a positive for the industry. The increase in some of the duties from 10% to 50% on auto component imports, how much of that will have an impact, because a significant portion of our imports are from countries where we already have FTAs. So again, that may not have a big impact, but from a long-term perspective, again, it's a step in the right direction. It is promoting domestic industry. So overall, I would say it's a good budget for the automotive sector. No concessions, no new concessions, but overall it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Pramod. I'll come to our next guest in this panel, Mr. Rohit Sabu. He is the CEO of NBC Bearing. It's a CK Birla owned company, and they are one of the leading automotive bearing manufacturer. Mr. Sabu, thank you so much for joining in.
Good afternoon, Nabil. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. You have been through the budget. What's your thoughts on this? Because especially a lot of announcement on steel, which is your core raw material. How do you see the budget?
So the budget actually addresses the auto segment more indirectly, in the sense that the infrastructure spend will indirectly impact the automotive sector. The scrappage policy is, we will need to see the details of it, but I don't think this is the ultimate thing that the auto industry wanted, but it is at least a start, because we have been hearing about the scrappage policy for quite some time now, but it's a start, and I am sure there will be in the coming month and years there will be new forms of it. Because if you see, I don't see there are many vehicles which are more than 20 years old in passenger vehicles. This thing more, it will affect the commercial vehicle side. That should give a good fillip to the commercial vehicle. As far as steel is concerned, we will have to study the HCN codes, but still I've heard that the import duty, the anti-dumping duty have been reduced in some of the cases for steel in China, which in turn will put some pressure on the Indian companies to reduce the steel prices, which should augur well, because you have seen in the last 3 months the steel prices have gone through the roof. And if the steel prices normalize, eventually it will impact the auto component and the final consumer. So we are hoping that the steel prices will stabilize. Whether at a higher level or a lower level, that's a different thing, but it should stabilize so that every day we don't have to negotiate a new price. Overall, it is a positive budget, but the impact needs to be seen after the details come in. Thank you, Nabil.
Thank you, Rohit, for joining in. Overall, it comes out that the scrappage policy is largely focused on commercial vehicle. That is seen as right move also by the expert. If I remember, day before yesterday, when we were talking about expectation from the industry, Mr. Malhotra and Mr. Singh both agreed that it should first be on the commercial vehicle side, and then probably move to passenger vehicles. So I think this is a step in tune with what the industry largely, was hoping. Coming back to the other, area, how do you see the supply chain crisis that the automotive industry has gone through after the pandemic? Do you think there's some strong steps that could set things right for the future?
So, as far as the supply chain is concerned, I don't think the budget has, at least I have not heard anything in the budget speech that may address the supply chain issues. There are many issues regarding availability of containers to availability of semiconductors. So, all these need to be seen, and I don't think they are very much budget related. They are happening because of a different reason, and we will need to address that in a separate way.
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to add on the supply chain thing, we used to goad a lot in the auto industry about 8 years back that we moved to 95%, 98% indigenization. In the last 2 years, because of two reasons. One, because of global sourcing, because of the quality and the price you get right. But the bigger reason was the changing technology in vehicles, whether it's in terms of batteries or whether in terms of semiconductors. We don't have the manufacturing resources. So we are dependent on external sources. So somehow that's quite a worrisome position. And we need to see that if in the auto industry, if the vehicles are going to get changed, the technology is changing, are we going to keep dependent on external markets, or are we going to build up infrastructure ourselves, or to give a push, whether in terms of R&D, production, supply chain? So that's a question which needs to be focused very sharply. And it's a concerning issue because it's going to impact our even limited demand we are not able to meet, whatever we have.
Thank you, Mr. Malhotra. I'll come to you, Pramod. Pramod, just want to understand from you. I think Pramod, can you hear us?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Pramod, just want to understand. Can you elaborate on how does it augur for the salary earners this budget? If you look at that, and the other side of the story, how does it augur for the car or automobile buyers?
So yeah, salaried earners, again, like I said, no new taxes, no long-term capital gains on stock market transactions where that 10% would have gone up was one big worry that was there. There was an expectation that this LTC scheme which got introduced, where 36,000 per person deduction that was allowed till 31st March 21, that will get extended was one expectation. Again, that has not come through. There has been a new tax introduced on ULIPs. So, if there are ULIPs about 2.5 lakhs premium annually being paid, then there is a 10% tax on that, which is now got introduced. So there are these finer changes insofar as, the salaried people are concerned. But per se, I would say overall, it's not a negative. There's no new news, no great news, no increased standard deduction. There was no work from home deductions. There was an expectation that with so much work from home happening, there may be some new concessions being introduced on that front. But the FM had to play a balancing act. 6.8% fiscal deficit with about 1,80,000 crore of disinvestment proceeds being factored into 6.8% means that it's already a very high fiscal deficit. So there was no legroom to give any bonanza. So that's the way one would rationalize it from a salaried payer's perspective. Again, from a person purchasing a car, there was an expectation, and I heard one of our panelists speak earlier about it, that, will depreciation be made available to individuals? Will there be a higher deduction available on purchase of new vehicles? None of those expectations have come through, but one needs to rationalize that in the context of the fiscal deficit situation.
Thank you, Pramod. Coming back to you, Mr. Malhotra, or the panel member, I have a question from Ajay Kumar Tiwari. I just want to read out this question. Automotive sector plays important role in Indian economy, but government is not giving sufficient focus. Do you think Indian automobile industry needs special focus of government to boost economy?
So can I answer this?
Yeah, Nikunj, I think Nikunj go on this, then I'll add something.
So I think auto industry has been treated as the sin industry for quite some time, and looks like that auto industry continues to be on the sin list of the government. So while some relief in terms of huge investments in capex, I guess by and large auto industry definitely does feel neglected, and there are no demand triggers except for the capex, some allocation to farm sector, which will definitely result in increased amount of spending, bigger focus on farm lending again, which will probably give a boost to the agriculture sector. Tractor segment is already doing very well. But overall, I think the auto industry has been left out of the scheme of things. And unless the government takes us off the sin list, I don't think I expect too much direct relief coming in to the auto industry, which is unfortunate because we are also one of the biggest organized employers in the country. And our employment spans across the length and breadth of the country to the smallest geography of the country. So we definitely do expect better treatment from the government.
Of course. This certainly contributes heavily to the GDP, also over 7%, and employs over 32 million people. That's the contribution that the industry makes, and of course have a huge contribution to the GST collection also. Coming back to you, Mr. Malhotra, I just want to understand what we get from the points coming up is that this budget is as good as no budget for the auto industry.
That's a slightly strong statement to make because, as I said, one of the biggest pain points of the auto industry, which Mr. Nikunj Sanghi mentioned, is that we are considered a sin industry because if you combine the taxation of the GST and the road tax, even an entry-level two-wheeler and entry-level car is at 40%, which is way higher than any other. But having said that, I would say there is a lot of focus which is happening on the government in terms of production, in terms of R&D, and in terms of making this place a China plus one strategy. So that's an indirect work. A lot of work is going behind the scenes, and a lot of state governments are also vying for it. We just had the industrial policy of Haryana government coming in. But having in terms of budget intervention, frankly, I agree with Nikunj, nothing has happened. And if I go over the last 3 years, and if somebody was to spell out what is the big benefit the auto industry has got, at least I don't remember any. Nikunj could probably add, Mr. Nikunj Sanghi is more knowledgeable, could add some more points on that point, but that's a big concern area. And as you mentioned, whether it's employment generation, whether it's a GDP, whether it's tax collection, whether it's keeping the wheels of the nation moving, every step ought to be there. So probably it requires a sharper focus. I couldn't agree with more than Mr. Nikunj Sanghi on this point.
Thank you, Mr. Malhotra. Coming up next is Mr. Shashank Srivastava from Maruti Suzuki. He will be joining in. We also have lined up Mr. Rajiv Buddhiraja and some other experts who will be joining in. But before I go to them, I'll just come back to you, Pramod. Just want to understand, people are saying that automotive industry did not get much of direct benefit in the last few years. Do you think this is a sector where the government could have put in more money or made the industry happier? Or do you think there are some more important sectors where the attention was required in much more, important way than automotive sector? And why do you think the industry feels that the sector has been out of the focus for this government so far?
See, we have a ye dil mange more philosophy. So, we always want more. Now, the FM made a statement, very interesting statement, that don't look at this as an individual event. She said that after India was hit and the world was hit by COVID, we've had a series of mini budgets, is what she said. And if I look at the PLI scheme, the production linked incentive scheme announcement that happened about few months back, the total amount outlay over there for different industries was 1,46,000 crores. And out of that, for the auto sector, 57,000 crores was reserved for the auto sector. It's a 5-year outlay, admittedly, and one may say that these numbers are not big. But she is saying that I want to incentivize domestic manufacturing. In again, 15 months back, the corporate taxes have come down. There's a 25% tax rate available. For new manufacturing setups, there is a 17% tax available. So, which is one of the best in the world.
Just to point, we are living in a time where demand is the biggest problem. Supply is not the biggest problem. If you're talking about corporate tax, it benefits the corporates, and it probably, in large sense, if you see it, mostly give boost to manufacturing or setting up a new plant or something of that kind of situation. But right now, in the last 2-3 years, what the automobile industry has been facing is a demand crunch. So how do you see that demand crunch being solved? In the last all three budgets, we have seen the focus has been away from, if you talk about the direct impact, away from the demand side. It is not working on demand push. It is rather focusing on supply side. Don't you think so?
So, which is where, if you see, what made US a great country, they spent a lot of money on infrastructure, on roads, highways, and, that is the direction, in
But
which we are
that's
focusing on, which is again the,
but
yeah.
Indian economy right now, the India's economy on a slide for last 2.5 years, 3 years. So in such a situation, is it the time to get your things ready for the future, or you want to address the situation that needs immediate attention? And what is the immediate attention? I'll come to you, Mr. Sanghi. What is your immediate attention as an automotive industry person?
So I think what we are looking at is demand triggers. And there are various ways in which these demand triggers can be set off. And Vinkesh talked about the additional depreciation available both to individuals, which has never happened. And I'm sure a depreciation, if individuals could also claim depreciation on their vehicles, it would be a big demand trigger, saying that the government has constraints in terms of not being able to reduce either the GST or cess on vehicles, which would make vehicles more affordable. So I think these were some very small steps which the industry was expecting and hoping that they would come forth. And then some relief to, I would say, middle class or even below that, because while the passenger vehicle industry is seeing some kind of traction, two-wheeler industry is definitely under pressure. And you can feel the stress coming to the two-wheeler industry. So I think some increase in disposable income of the middle class and the lower middle class was what we were hoping for, because that was the other demand trigger which the government could have pushed, even if they were not willing to give any direct benefit to the automotive industry. But just like Pramod very rightly said, that overall, if you look at what the government is doing with the health sector, with the infrastructure sector, with recapitalization of banks, I think those are indirect benefits which will benefit the entire economy, and the spin-off would be some benefit coming to the auto industry also. So I think those are some of the reliefs that we were definitely looking at.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sanghi. Thank you so much, Mr. Shashank Srivastava, for joining in today's live panel discussion. 2 days ago, we discussed about these expectations. Now, do you think the finance minister has made your all expectations meet?
Meeting all expectations is probably not possible. We had a long list, as you know, but under the current circumstances, I think it's a pretty good budget because on the demand generation front, we have the government expenditure going up substantially.
And tell you what were your expectation. You wanted some actions to reduce the acquisition cost. You wanted some action so that people have money in their hands. You wanted a policy for the scrapping of passenger vehicles also.
Yeah.
Now
We had three main things, Nabil. One, of course, was that a growth-oriented budget, because I said automobile growth is very closely related to the growth of the GDP per capita. That was something which I had said at the first point. And in fact, I said the correlation factor is as high as 0.9865, on which, Nabil, you had smiled, I remember. The second thing was the scrappage policy. And the third was such things as the accelerated depreciation for corporates to continue, as also the income, the deduction on income tax calculation for loans which are taken for vehicle purchase. Now, if you look at the growth oriented, the first part, I think it's pretty good under the current circumstances, in the sense that the government has insisted on expenditure in areas, especially like infrastructure, which are like income as well as employment multipliers. So I think that is significant, because the investment has gone into those areas which are income and labor multiplier. And that's actually pretty good. Second is there was no change in the taxation on individuals, which was like people were saying there could be a wealth tax, cess, or things like that. So, or even a dead corporation tax withdrawal, which also didn't happen. So in that sense, it's a pretty good thing. So on the growth front, I think it's good. And I think most of it is financed by deficit. The deficit going up, expectation to almost 6.6, I think, or 6.8% for next year. So that part is good. On the scrappage policies also, the finance minister announced that it would be coming. And I think it's better to comment on it once we see the fine print, because our expectations could be totally different. So it's best not to comment on it. It's a welcome move. And I think I remember one of the participants, I think Deepak it was, who said that in India, we can have a policy at least starting, and then it can move on, and we can slowly modify it. So I think it's very welcome that at least the policy has been announced, the policy will come through. But we have to wait and see the fine print.
How do you see the 20 years age given for personal vehicle, which is largely passenger vehicle, I think?
Yeah, so I think there was some mention about 20 years and 15 years for commercial. For vehicles beyond 20 years, I think there are, by our calculation, about 39 lakh vehicles in that category. But of course, some of them would have been scrapped already, so we really don't know. And I think it's best not to comment till we get the actual fine print. And then I think, but as far as the scrappage policy is concerned, yes, I think it's a very welcome step.
Thank you, Shashank ji. I just want to understand, you talked about the current account surplus, and in the current scenario that you said that it speaks about the contracting market, low demand. Do you think there's any direct announcement or direct thing that could immediately spur the demand? Do you think something there?
Yeah, so if you look at, you're asking me, Nabil?
Yes.
Yeah, I mentioned about the current account surplus or deficit. The current account became surplus after, I think, 51 quarters. The last we saw was in 2007. But we said normally it has two components to it. One is the trade account, and the other is the invisible remittances, or for the investments abroad, for which remittances go, or even including, for example, NRI remittances. So those were the two components, and it was positive. Normally, it's if it reflects a good trade balance in a growing economy, it's positive. But I think it was not so, and it was more of a reflection of lower oil prices, and the lower import of non-precious metals. So I think it also pointed out to lower imports. It's not as if exports increased, but imports were lower, and that is how the count. So it was not really a good sign in that sense, because it shows lower economic activity. But with this budget and with greater activity, I'm sure you will see a very different picture on even the current account front.
Thank you so much, Mr. Srivastava. Please stay tuned. I'll ask another question in some time. In the meantime, we have Avik Chattopadhyay joining in. Thank you so much, Avik, for joining. Avik is an industry veteran. I just want to understand, how do you rate the budget? What are your key takeaways in terms of hits and in terms of misses?
See, overall, Nabil, always, sometimes what happens is, society reaches a certain situation where expectations are so low, or maybe such kind of fear is driven into the larger population that if you don't do those feared things, or if you just even pass with just distinction marks, your reaction is, it's a damn good budget, it's a balanced budget, it's a growth oriented budget, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's my overall impression on the budget. Okay, it's a safe budget, it's a business as usual. And the first impression I got was India is going back into 5-year plans. Okay, because this budget is more of a 5-year plan budget. Okay, all the larger allocations are all in 5 years, in 6 years. Like in the Mahabharata, there was this thing, Ashwatthama Hatha Iti Gaja. So the Iti Gaja is the in 6 years, in 5 years bit. So 1,47,000 crores of rupees in 6 years. Okay, 65,000 crores of rupees in 5 years. We don't really know as to what really is going to be spent this current or the coming financial year. And that is crucial to me, because that really will determine whether we will actually be on the 11 or the 11.5% growth or the recovery which is being touted by many, or would we actually be again working around 6 to 7% growth. So from that perspective, if I were to come directly to the automobile industry, the current situation, and as Shashank also correctly said, and very rightly said, because he is close to 50% of the market, right? You can make the industry get into a revival mode. Just like safety systems, you can either have active safety systems or passive safety systems. So you can have active stimuli or you can have passive stimuli, right? I don't see any active stimulus in this particular budget.
So
infrastructure spending is.
Come back to you. I'll come back to you again. Because Shashank has to leave for an important meeting. I'll just take his one more comment, then I'll come back to you. Shashank, how do you see? You talked about the money coming to the consumer's hand. Do you think this budget was something that could bring in? Number two, very pertinent question. The industry has been pushed back or behind by 3-4 years. Do you see anything in this budget that could probably help you accelerate the recovery or returning to the volumes or the market situation, the peak market situation that we had last time?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it that the first criteria for auto industry to do well, especially in the long-term perspective, is that the growth has to come back. And if the growth indicated is what it is, at 11% or so, I think it's that's the first priority, which under the current circumstances, with the current fiscal constraints, it's remember the fiscal deficit indicated this year will be I think 9.6 or 9.5, which is pretty large, and especially if the fiscal budget targets were actually less than 3. So and what by the indication is that by 24 or 25 it would come down to about 4.5 or something like that. So I think that first criteria under the current circumstances has to be applauded. That there has been, and remember the GDP growth, how does it come? You have a C, you have a I, which is the investment, you have a C, which is the private consumption, and then you have the government, which is G, and then you have net exports. So oil prices, what they are, I don't know what the next exports will be. Government expenditure is the one big thing. And that's a common way by which economies come back. That whenever there is stress, government spends money, there is fiscal expenditure. And it could be inflationary though. But I think in the current circumstances, and the money which is to be coming, which has to be bridged, is through borrowing or from disinvestments, as the finance minister indicated. There was no additional sort of burden, which was a positive thing, I thought. So basically, the budget, if it's good and oriented for growth, you should see. After all, GDP is what it gives money in the hands of people. Although I know there would be arguments about inequalities that sometimes when you have growth, you may not have equal growth across various segments of the society. And I think that's the pet subject of many people with the different leanings in the political spectrum. But generally speaking, you need to focus on increasing the pie and then talk about
That's what I'm asking. How far are we from that 5 million units target that we had?
That I think it's very difficult for me to answer at this point of time, because but one good thing, Nabil, also is that this year we seem to have been improving on the sentiment part, which is the sentiment on the COVID front. And there is a large commitment, I think, for vaccine, which I think it's a good thing, because ultimately it will lead to much better economic activity and a much more confidence among consumers. And auto industry depends on sentiment. In economic terms, it's a discretionary purchase. So that is what you would see.
Thank you, Shashank.
Thank you.
Avik, you rightly mentioned 5 becomes a very magical word for this budget. I think you're talking about moving towards 5-year plan. The government talked about 5 trillion economy. The industry talked about 5 million passenger vehicle annual sales. Do you see anything in this budget that could lead us to these expectations? These two expectations of 5 million units and 5 trillion economy?
Leaving aside my initial, let's say, sarcasm, this is actually a long-term budget, very frankly. Because everything that is actually planned and what has been outlaid by the government here, except for specifically on sectors like health, right, which are immediate interventions and injections of money, everything else actually has a longer term impact, which is rightly so, because when your economy has actually got battered in the way our first half of the current financial year was, and also given the fact that we are not really recovering as quickly as most of the other economies are. And I'm not talking about only the developed countries, I'm talking about also the developing world or the emerging markets. We are talking about the deficit of that 9+%, right? So we need to have a longer term impact or a longer term view of things. Therefore, for example, the investment in infrastructure that happens the coming financial year and the next financial year will actually see in improvement in the consumption power of the person who would want to buy a discretionary product, as Shashank was saying, which is an automobile, possibly 2 years from now. Okay, because when infrastructure projects go up, I mean, who are really employed? Okay, they are not the people currently here who are discussing on this panel. They are people who possibly cannot even afford to buy a bicycle today. So they might be in a position to buy a two-wheeler 2 to 3 years from now, right? Therefore, right now in this current budget for the next financial year, do we really see any, as I was talking about an active stimulus? No, we haven't. So we haven't still seen the government realizing that a 60,000 rupees motorcycle is not a luxury item. Okay, or a 2.5-3 lakh rupee car is not a luxury item, right? Or a heavy commercial vehicle which actually works on the infrastructure projects is not a luxury item. Okay, for the government today, even today, the automobile is a discretionary purchase, okay, and it still continues to be a luxury item, and therefore it is taxed accordingly. And so there is really no stimulus, active stimulus this year.
No,
I think rightly so.
no.
Yeah, Nabil.
A vehicle needed just to do A to B, like a commuter segment vehicle, a two-wheeler, or an entry-level car, a, a bus that runs on, runs the people, the masses. Why do you think they are still a luxury product in India?
They should not be. The biggest paradox in my country today is that a 60,000 rupees smartphone attracts lower GST than a 60,000 rupees scooter or motorcycle.
That's the
Okay,
that's the difference. A 60,000 smartphone is certainly a luxury product, but 60,000 rupees
exactly.
two-wheeler is not a luxury product, because this is the basic necessity.
Exactly.
You have 5,000 rupees mobile available in the market.
So that is the anomaly which lies in our mindset. It is more to do with our mindset, right? I mean, yes, the government has set aside 18,000 crores of rupees for a PPP for public transport and buses. That's fine, but you can also calculate and find out how much really would 18,000 crores of rupees buy you. How many more buses would it buy this country? Okay, in a country where currently the bus penetration is 1.3 per thousand people. Okay, it is the lowest. It is the lowest in any developing country of any consequence, actually. 18,000 crores of rupees for a PPP in bus transport. Yeah, I mean, it's like giving 2,500 crores of rupees for 40 cities for cleaning up their air. It's as similar as that. And now what you've done is you've added 2.5 rupees as what is called agri infra cess on petrol. And I think you're adding 4 rupees as agri infra cess on diesel. So it just tells you very clearly the direction. So the government is saying, guys, you guys are still making discretionary products. You guys are still making luxury products. Sort your own house in order. We've got more important things to do, and they are of longer consequence. You're on mute, Nabil.
So with this, I think the tax on fuel, especially diesel, it goes beyond 72%, 73%, I think, right? So means
it does.
We were already highest taxed in. Now again, this kind of tax additional cess being added. Of course, there seems to be some scheme in the mind of the government that we probably don't understand. In the meantime, I'll welcome Saket Mehra, who is joining in from Grand Thornton. Thank you, Saket, for joining. First comment from you. How do you see the budget 2021? We met at the budget 2020 also. Now want to understand from you, what are the misses and hits in the budget?
Thanks, Nabil, for having me in over here. Am I audible? Great, thanks. Yeah, Nabil, we very much met last year as well. I think this year I was hearing my fellow colleagues and the panelists some time back. But I would say, unlike in the previous budgets, there hasn't been any kind of a mixed reaction. It's been largely a positive reaction. At least that's what we are hearing from our clients in different sectors, not only auto as a sector, but across the sector, and more importantly, infrastructure and healthcare, for all the reasons given out in the budget. But yes, I think everyone needs to move with a bit of caution. Why? Because with enhanced spending, or the government spending which has been rolled out, which is expected to lay over the next few years, there is an expectation of an inflation also setting in the times to come. On one side, it's really good to have all these announcements and to have a very, fundamentally strong announcements coming out from the ministry. But on the other side, I think that's how the global investors would be typically looking at India now, in terms of how do we actually kind of align our monetary policies not to overtake all the stimulus which has been announced so far by the government.
Saket, why do you think the government has completely ignored electric vehicle in this budget? There's no announcement, there's no mention of electric vehicle in this.
So, Nabil, I mean, if you look at, I think it was somehow expected. Why? Because the government, in my view, in my personal view, is not only looking at electric vehicle as the only alternative fuel. There are other alternative fuels like CNG, and I believe there has been an announcement of kind of expanding the distribution network to almost now 100 odd districts in India. So the intention is very clear that the government doesn't only want to rely on electric vehicles only, and they want to explore the other alternative fuel technologies as well. Plus, if you look at the announcement towards the hydrogen mission, towards producing the hydrogen cells, that's also towards the alternative fuel to be adopted by the consumers.
Thank you, Saket. Avik, same question to you. Why do you think electric vehicle did not make a cut to the speech today?
Yeah, it was interesting, Nabil. After the budget, I was watching, the address by Mr. Gadkari to the press, and I didn't catch him from the beginning. I caught him from a point when he was saying that India will have to import lithium-ion batteries. So, I mean, what are we substituting, right? And as Saket was correctly saying, I mean, this entire thing of the Atmanirbhar plan. So we are looking at alternate means of clean mobility. Okay, so you currently have CNG, you can get into HCNG, and then you have, and hydrogen, according to me, in the long run is going to play, hydrogen and methanol, according to me, in the long run, the two of them are going to play very strong roles in government policy, and therefore the way the entire mobility ecosystem also it evolves. Because I know there are people in Niti Aayog who are very, very strong proponents of both methanol and hydrogen. I know the oil coordination committee and the oil companies, they've been actually doing a lot of work on methanol, ethanol, and hydrogen. And it's about time that when you're going on to this Atmanirbhar drive, and you actually want to somewhere you want to outdo China a bit in terms of having necessarily needing to import lithium ion from there. This is the alternate that you'll work out, which to me is very, very good in the long run. This country, given its diversity, cannot survive on just one or two solutions to clean mobility. Okay, we need to offer the consumer at least 3 to 4 viable alternatives. We've been trying with ethanol for many years, hasn't worked out. Okay, I mean, currently your fuel does have, I think, what, 10% or 15% ethanol, but that is not yet viable. Okay, it has to be viable, and this to me is the right direction.
Thank you so much, Avik, for your thoughts. I'll go to now Rajiv Singh. Rajiv Singh from Deloitte. He has just joined in. Rajiv, if you could hear me.
Yes, Nabil, good to see you. I hope I'm audible and visible.
Clear. Everything is clear, Rajiv, but hope the budget has also come clear to you. How do you what's your initial takes?
So Nabil, at least some positives, I would say. Though we'll have to wait for, as everyone says, the devil is in the details. So we'll have to wait for the details of the scrappage policy. But I think it's a move in the right direction. The only thing is that I was expecting that the scrappage policy could have been more mandatory rather than voluntary. I think the word voluntary is giving us a little tentativeness there, and we have seen it in so many countries, be it Germany, be it UK, be it France. Whenever they came out with the scrappage policy, they always came out like a mandatory policy, and they said that any vehicle which is older than, say, a particular duration, you have to give it back, and the consumers get, or the customers get, a certain monetary incentive which they can use against the new vehicle.
Worthiness test becomes mandatory, then almost it's one in the same thing. Do you think it will come?
Yeah, see, let's take the example of Germany out here. They do continuous monitoring of vehicles every year, every 2 years, and so on. But they have a huge infrastructure. They have 3 or 4 large testing organizations which have their testing centers spread all over the country. Now, in India, we really don't have. So are we going to be dependent on RTO to do all these testings, or are we going to create that infrastructure which will really certify whether the vehicle is roadworthy or not? So I think that is what we need to wait and watch. And if that happens, I think it will also give rise to two new set of industries. One is the testing centers, which will test the vehicle's roadworthiness. And the other is then it can also give rise to the scrappage organizations, which will actually really be scrapping the vehicle and coming out with all the whether it is copper, steel, rubber, and electrical components out of the vehicle. So it can give rise to two new industries as well if it's implemented well.
Rajiv, do you think the budget meets the crucial need that the industry had right now in terms of spurring the demand? Do you think it addresses that concern right now in the immediate term? I'm talking about the immediate term.
Yeah. So let's look at it both the passenger vehicle and the two-wheeler separately, and the medium and the heavy-duty commercial vehicles separately. I think with the government's focus, which has come on infrastructure very, very strongly, there is a likelihood that the demand for heavy and medium-duty vehicles, as well as construction equipment vehicles, both is likely to go up because of the push out there. In the passenger vehicles, Nabil, our view was that it was not so much about the affordability of the vehicle. I think affordability is not a bigger issue in India. It was the willingness of people to go ahead and buy a vehicle. Now, the point is that is the budget going to give enough confidence for the consumers in the country to not save, because with the uncertainty around COVID, everyone wanted to save the money, but to go ahead and spend that money on buying a vehicle and so on and so forth. So I think it's a question of willingness, which was more important. So I think we'll have to wait and watch, but I hope that the budget gives them over a period of time some positivity there.
No, it was also about consumer sentiment that could have been triggered by providing some kind of relief in terms of tax slab.
Yes.
Personal income tax slab should have been increased. How do you see the GST rationalization that the industry has been talking about in the last 2-3 years? At least some of the commuter segment bikes and all could have been relooked at it. How do you see that?
So Nabil, see, GST is off the table when it comes to budget because we have a GST council which needs to take a decision, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that given that this time the FM really did go far beyond the mandate that typically a budget has, maybe that there could have been some announcement that we are visiting or revisiting. We didn't hear anything of that sort, so I believe that there is no revisit out there. But when it comes to say the income tax slabs and so on, the expectation was that at least for the mid-income group, there could have been some relief which could have been provided in a pandemic and a COVID year. Unfortunately, that did not happen. We were definitely not expecting for the higher income bracket any rationalization or reduction of taxes. If at all, we were afraid because we heard so much about COVID tax coming in for especially the higher income tax bracket, that it was a good thing to at least ensure that was not there as a part of the budget. So that is a good thing. The only thing that I think we missed was that maybe for the mid-income group, probably the tax slab could have been slightly altered. You could have given away some more money in the hands of the consumers back. That is something that I think that we didn't hear enough. I think the government was just looking at how to ensure that their collections did not go down, given the fiscal deficit pressure.
What about the electric vehicle? That's the biggest buzzword, but ironically, it doesn't find any mention in the budget.
Yes, electric doesn't find any mention, but I was at least glad to hear some mention about hydrogen in our budget. But I think that we have to look at also a budget as a continuum of lot of decisions. So we did hear a lot of announcements before the budget, which were all in terms of the push towards electrification of vehicles in the country. And one thing I liked about the budget is there is a continuity in the thinking. So if you look at the way the corporate taxes were slashed, say in Jan 2019, and for people who were making new investments, the corporate tax slab was probably as low as 15% as well. And then if you look at PLI, which got announced maybe a few weeks back, which was all production-linked incentive scheme. And now when you look, the entire focus in terms of increasing the customs duty on certain parts, which is more towards Atmanirbhar Bharat and so on. I think that this all looks like that it is all in continuum. It is all about creating the ecosystem in the country. So even on EV, I think the focus will be on creating that ecosystem in the country.
Thank you, Rajiv. One final question to you. How do you see MSME allocation and announcements that have been made? Do you think there's going to be any major boost for the auto component, uh, considering there's also a consideration of increasing the custom duty on some of the parts? How do you see that?
So see, I think I'm more.
Yeah, for automobiles.
Yeah. So I'm I was more positive with respect to the increase in excise duty. I mean, one can always say that this is how is it going to impact the cost of my vehicles, but then there is also a reduction on the duty on the steel. So I think that net it is going to have a positive impact in terms of pricing. But with the increase in imports on some of the components, I think some of the players, the tier one, the tier two players, may find that there is an opportunity for them to get into those components, especially because more and more OEMs would want to source those parts from the country, from India itself. So I think that should be more a positive news, Nabil, from a tier one, tier two player perspective.
Thank you so much, Rajiv, for joining in today at ETAuto live panel discussion.
My pleasure.
Recording the panel for the audience. I have here with me Mr. Sandeep Agarwal, founder of Droom.in. It's a digital platform for automobile buying, I think. Sandeep, thank you for joining in. How do you see budget for the auto industry overall, and for yourself also for the business like you? We have seen a lot of allotment for the digital side also. How do you see this?
Yeah, thank you, Nabil, for having me. So, I think in all the budget has been fairly good for the automobile industry. We run the India's largest online automobile marketplace, all digital. And, the biggest thing is by extending the life for the economic life for the vehicle, the users' perceived ROI has gone up, which is very good thing, given that it's one of the largest ticket item for any human being in terms of the lifetime. Second thing is government allocating sizable budget for road infrastructure. And third thing is government eventually basically ensuring the scraping of vehicle has a global norms. All those things create a very robust automobile market, higher adoption of automobile, but also, the adoption of used automobile will only accelerate.
Thank you, Sandeep. I'll come to you again, Avik, and just want to see from you, Avik, how do you see this digital allocation going to help automobile sector? Do you see any impact, direct or indirect?
It surely will. In fact, even before this budgetary allocation was made, as Sandeep would be the biggest, the best person to answer on this. But the pandemic itself, I think, it fast tracked the digital adoption, or the adoption of digital actually as an enabling medium for the entire automobile industry. Earlier it was being done only by a few players in that. I mean, people like Sandeep, Droom, and a few others, and because that was the very platform that they chose. But then, even for the vehicle manufacturers, vehicle marketers, even for organizations to work at the back end, right? The entire supply chain, digital has now become, the very method of actually of engaging. Okay, whether it is to build a relationship or whether it is to place orders or even to track and trace, that is the way forward. Therefore, yes, the government obviously does have a very, very strong focus on digitization, and that should pay actually good dividends in the long run, very frankly. And it's just that I guess what really is required is, in this entire digital euphoria and the euphoria of going digital in the many different, the center tries certain initiatives, the states go into their own initiatives. Just hope that some point of time they all converge, right? And each Indian citizen actually has, just one digital footprint to work on, because then life becomes very, very easy for all of us. Like the census is going to go digital. Okay, that's going to be excellent, because I was listening somewhere that our last census, the previous census we did, we still don't have the data on the castes. Right now, if you go digital, okay, and the government has allocated some 3,000 plus crores for that, you do it this month, in the next 2 to 3 months, all your data is with you.
Thank you, Avik, for such a good interpretation of the budget. I'll come to you again, Sandeep, once again and try and understand from the used automobile point of view. Uh, Also, how do you think this will give a boost? You have talked about it will give a boost to the used car space, but how, if you could explain? And what are the hits and misses that you find, top three hits and misses in this budget?
Sure, Nabil. So, I think the biggest thing is, Nabil, in the past, when you bought the vehicle as a passenger vehicle, government will issue you an RC for 15 years validity. That has gone to 20 years for a passenger vehicle and for 15 years for a commercial vehicle. That also means when you allocate your sizable saving or budget to buy a vehicle, you can now amortize it for 5 years longer. That means your total cost of ownership on an annual basis actually goes down. So that is something, it's a significant improvement in terms of the cost of owning a vehicle in this country. Right. That also means, on an average, what we have seen on Droom is the average ownership of the vehicle is coming down in general. Like people are, they have aspirational value. They want to buy as their income changes, circumstances changes. They keep on upgrading themselves to a bigger and better cars. Given the car has a 20-year economic life, will also create a very robust used automobile adoption, because otherwise the user, when after 8-9 years, user has a issue in terms of that, hey, am I buying something which will have an end of life very soon?
How do you see the ruling that we have in NCR when 10 years old diesel car was banned?
Yeah. So, yeah, sure, Nabil. Thank you. I think, Nabil, I hope the Delhi government also at a state level does consider extending the life, because, metro cities as it is have, significant high cost of living. And on top of that, if you have to amortize your vehicle for 10 years, it all adds up to consumers' domestic budget, household budget. So I hope the Delhi government changes that. There are so many other ways to control the pollution, rather than just keeping the 10-year life.
But it was a court ruling, so we'll have to see. It's a bit complex than we see. Thank you so much, Sandeep, for joining today at ETAuto live panel discussion on budget. I have here with me Rajiv Kapoor joining in completely from a different value chain of the automotive industry. Rajiv is the MD of Steelbird's Helmet. Thank you so much, Rajiv, for joining in. What's the budget for you?
Budget is fantastic for sure, because government is investing in many sectors. So government is pumping a lot of money in a lot of sectors, and due to this, lot of employment will be generated, and there will be a liquidity in the market. And due to this, all the sectors, not even automobile, but all the sectors will increase many folds as per me.
So anything specific for your sector directly? How do you rate the budget? What are the missing points? You said that it's a fantastic budget. Do you think it could have been better? You think anything is missing in the budget, or you're just satisfied?
Yes, absolutely. I can quote many things which are missing for sure. Like, see, I have told these things many times that we have to lower the GST rates on the necessity items. What is happening that today we have spare parts of two-wheelers in a 28% of GST. It's incredible. And Audi cars or Porsche car tires are also into a 28% of GST, which is not right. As per me, all 100cc to 125cc motorbikes must have a lower GST, and all the super bikes 200cc above and all cars, BMW, Mercedes, Audis, these must be, if you make a double GST too, for a niche segment, nothing will change. Nothing will change. If I have to buy a Mercedes for 70 lakhs, I can buy a Mercedes for 75 lakhs too. This will not change to me. So for the necessity items, for the affordable class, we must lower the GST, and we must double the GST for the higher class people. This we must do to balance the GST figures. This I am saying from many years, but it is not happening. Second, Okay, this is one point which is very important. See, if I have to buy iPhone, I can pay 10,000 extra. But the GST for all the phones are the same, which is not right. So same, and we don't talk about more about industry. We have to be an industrialist country. All the countries in the world who become superpower, they are based on industries, manufacturing hub. We have to become a manufacturing hub. So we have to give a lot of facilities to the industrialist. Labor reforms has to be changed. Facilities, electricity. Okay, highways. They talk about highways. That is very, very good. Okay, they are building up many highways, but we have to change a law to compete with China. Otherwise, we will never be able to compete with China. No, I don't get you. You are on mute mode.
Thank you so much, Manav, for joining in. So what comes out from the panel members who have joined in, we are immensely grateful to the panel members who have joined in today. It was certainly a long panel members. Everybody who is who of the industry has joined in today. Thank you so much, Saket, for joining in. Thank you so much, Rajiv, for joining in. Of course, at the end, we see that there's nothing much negative in the budget, but there are some certainly positive that will have indirect impact on the automotive industry in terms of in long term. And that's the thought that's coming up from the industry leaders and experts. Thank you so much once again for joining in ETAuto live panel discussion. ETAuto continue to decode budget for automotive industry. Will have write-ups, analysis following in the next 2 days. Stay tuned to ETAuto. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thanks, brother.